The galaxy shivered beneath a fading sun. Worlds, once gleaming jewels of civilization, now lay cracked and silent, their cities reduced to tombs of ash. Starships drifted through the void like lost spirits, their engines dimmed to whispers, echoing the dying heartbeat of an empire that had ruled for millennia. From the shadows of a shattered sector, the remnants of the Imperium's greatest fleet huddled against the encroaching darkness. But even their combined might could not halt the slow collapse of the stars. Yet, in this twilight of steel and sorrow, a solitary figure stood upon the bridge of the flagship Eternitas Ultima, gazing at the crumbling constellations, and the weight of eternity pressed upon them with unrelenting force. We truly love and care for you. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. At the heart of the ship, Commander Zarek Valoris, known across countless sectors as the Silent King's Warden, felt the gnawing ache of centuries pressing upon his bones. Immortality, they had once whispered to him, was a gift, a boon that allowed one to witness the rise and fall of empires, to shape the currents of history with a single command. And yet, standing amidst the ruins of stars, he felt less like a king and more like a relic. Time had eroded his companions, his allies, his very faith in the stars themselves. Only he remained, eternal, yet unbearably human in the quiet moments between wars. The first echo of rebellion had arrived as a whisper, subtle yet insistent. A loyal world, nestled in the Vale of Caris, had sent distress signals, a plea for aid against a rising insurgency. Its cries reached Zarek as mere fragments of static and flickering hollow signals, but he understood the weight behind them. To ignore the call would be to abandon his principles. To answer could spark the very chain of betrayal he had long feared. And so, he hesitated, torn between the rigid strategy of a centuries-old mind and the fragile morality that still lingered beneath the surface. Outside, the void shimmered with dying stars, their light flickering like the last breath of a dying god. Each world that fell, each fleet that vanished into the emptiness, reflected the internal decay gnawing at Zarek's heart. Memories surged unbidden, wars of conquest, betrayals from brothers in arms, and the faces of those who had once called him friend. They had all faded, consumed by ambition, fear, or the inexorable march of time. Yet he could not abandon hope entirely. Hope was all that remained, fragile as the last ember of a funeral pyre in the endless night. "Commander," a voice whispered from the shadows of the command deck, and Zarek turned to see Captain Lyra Kale, her armor etched with the scars of countless battles. She was loyal, unwavering, yet even her eyes betrayed the uncertainty that lurked behind the calculated exterior. The signals grow more insistent. They plead for immediate intervention. "Your orders?" Valoris's gaze returned to the void. "Prepare the fleet," he said quietly, though the words tasted of ash. "But proceed with caution. The insurgency may be but a symptom of a larger rot. We cannot save every world, nor every soul. Remember, immortality is not immunity to failure." Kyle nodded, but the hesitation lingered like smoke in the corridors. She understood, as he did, that each decision bore the weight of centuries, that every command might sow seeds of betrayal or despair. Yet the galaxy demanded action, even as it crumbled beneath the shadow of time. As the fleet maneuvered toward the Vale of Caris, Zarek allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The universe had not always been so quiet. Once, empires had sung in harmony with the stars, their legions marching to the rhythm of ambition and pride. Heroes rose, legends fell, and civilizations were etched into eternity with blood and fire. But now silence reigned. Silence and the soft, inexorable hum of warships that carried the burden of hope across a dying galaxy. Inside the flagship's council chamber, Zarak convened a gathering of his most trusted officers. Hollow projections flickered with the images of lost worlds, strategic grids, and intelligence reports that spoke of conspiracies both subtle and vast. There were no heroes here, no saviors, only soldiers, bound by duty yet haunted by fear. "We march to Caris not merely to quell rebellion," he began, his voice steady, measured, yet carrying the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. "We march because to ignore this would be to dishonor all that we have endured." And yet, he paused, letting the silence stretch like a blade across the room. "We must tread carefully. Betrayal lurks not only in the enemy, but within ourselves. Immortality teaches vigilance, but even vigilance cannot forestall the decay of loyalty." His words hung heavy, unspoken questions etched in the minds of all present. Loyalty had a price, and often the cost was one's soul. Kael's eyes met his across the room, and in that fleeting glance, Zarak saw the reflection of his own fears, the knowledge that even in triumph, victory could be pyrrhic, hollow, and fleeting. The journey to Caris was marked by the slow, inevitable tension of anticipation. Ships glided through the darkness, their weapons dormant, but their readiness absolute. Across the void, signals of unrest flared like distant flares, illuminating pockets of rebellion and the faint shimmer of treachery. Each moment stretched into eternity, each decision weighed against the scales of morality and ambition. As the veil of Caris emerged from the shadows, Zarak's mind wandered to the first great betrayal that had shaped his long life. A comrade, a brother in arms, had once chosen ambition over loyalty, leaving entire legions stranded on a battlefield that became a graveyard. The memory burned with the intensity of a dying sun, yet it was tempered by the awareness that history repeated itself in cycles. Betrayal was eternal, as was the cost of ignoring it. The planet below lay scarred, its cities fractured, its fields blackened by fire. From orbit, the insurgency appeared coordinated, precise, almost surgical in its defiance. Zarak knew that to descend would mean stepping into a crucible, a trial where the boundaries of morality, loyalty, and survival would be tested, and he welcomed it, not for the thrill of combat, but for the certainty it offered amidst a galaxy adrift in chaos. He turned to Cael once more. "Prepare the landing protocols. We do not go as conquerors, but as arbiters of what remains. Every choice, every command will echo for centuries. Let none say we failed in foresight or courage." As the fleet began its descent toward Caris, the stars above seemed to dim even further, swallowed by the weight of the void. The silence of the galaxy pressed upon Zarak like a living thing, and yet, beneath it, the pulse of eternity persisted. Somewhere in the darkness, empires waited, betrayals festered, and immortality carried the heaviest chains of all. And so, the march began. A march not only across the stars, but through the labyrinth of loyalty, morality, and the haunting specter of betrayal. Zarak Valoris, eternal yet vulnerable, would face the trials ahead, not merely as a commander, but as a witness to the rise and fall of all he had ever held dear. The galaxy awaited, indifferent, and the first step of the Legion's spectral march had already begun. The veil of Caris unfolded beneath the fleet like a fractured jewel, its oceans scorched, cities scarred, and skies veiled in ashen clouds. Even from orbit, the devastation spoke of a struggle far older and deeper than simple rebellion. The insurgents had not arisen spontaneously. Their precision suggested careful planning, resources siphoned from unseen powers. Yet Zarek Valoris could not allow speculation to paralyze him. Orders had to be given, alliances weighed, and the fragile trust of his officers maintained. The weight of leadership, heavier with every passing century, pressed upon his shoulders like a tombstone. Captain Lyra Kyle approached him again, her expression tight, controlled, yet shadowed by doubt. "Commander, the intelligence reports indicate factions within the insurgency itself. Some are mortal zealots, others not entirely human. There are whispers of warp-touched units operating in secrecy." Valoris's gaze lingered on the planet below. The surface shimmered with ghostly light, as if the very soil exhaled malice. "The warp," he said softly, almost to himself. "Even here, its tendrils reach. It corrupts not merely flesh, but thought, loyalty, trust. Kale, prepare contingency squads. We will not fall prey to illusions or whispers." Kyle nodded, though the hesitation lingered like smoke in the corridors. Loyalty, she understood, was a brittle thread, and the galaxy had long proven that even the strongest bonds fray in the presence of fear, ambition, or immortality. She had seen legions crumble from betrayal, leaders undone by those closest to them, and yet she remained, a constant, a shadow at the periphery of Valoris's consciousness. The council chamber hummed with tension. Officers stood around hollow projections of Caris, tracing the lines of rebellion with precise clinical gestures. Among them were figures whose histories were entwined with Valoris, veterans of wars long past, strategists who had once plotted the conquest of a dozen sectors, and advisors whose counsel was both invaluable and dangerously laced with ambition. "Commander," said Strategos Varek, his voice cutting through the chamber's quiet like a sharpened blade, "we must consider the possibility that the insurgency is a diversion. While our attention is drawn here, other sectors may rise in defiance, or worse, fall into the hands of our enemies." Valoris regarded him with measured patience. Varek had served him for centuries, his loyalty unquestionable, yet history had proven that even the most faithful could falter under pressure. "Varek," Valoris replied, "the galaxy does not wait for certainty. It punishes hesitation. We proceed with caution, yes, but inaction is a far deadlier foe than deception." A murmur passed through the chamber, the officers exchanging glances that spoke of unspoken fears. The specter of betrayal lingered, subtle yet persistent, threading its way into every command, every tactical decision. In the silence between words, Valoris felt the eternal truth of leadership in an empire teetering on collapse. Those who serve faithfully may still sow ruin without intent, and those who betray do so with conviction. He allowed himself a brief, private reflection. Immortality, once thought a gift, now revealed itself as a curse. Centuries had granted him wisdom, yet wisdom offered no shield against the corrosion of loyalty. He had witnessed comrades turn to ambition, mentors fall to fear, and even the most disciplined minds succumb to the subtle seductions of power. The burden of centuries was not the memory of battles won, but the knowledge that every choice would ripple across time, leaving consequences unseen until too late. Kale stepped closer, her voice low. "Commander, the insurgent leaders request parley. They claim their cause is righteous, that they fight not for conquest, but for survival against distant oppressors." Valoris's lips tightened. Survival, righteousness, terms so malleable, so easily twisted in the shadows of war. "Arrange the parley," he said at last. "But remember this, even truths may be traps, and mercy is a tool as sharp as any blade." We will meet them not with vengeance, but with vigilance. Trust must be earned, and even then, it may be fleeting. The descent to Caris was slow, deliberate, each vessel slicing through the atmosphere with silent precision. Below, fires scarred the land like veins of molten sorrow, and the echoes of conflict carried upward as if the planet itself cried for recognition. Valoris felt the weight of those cries, not merely the mortal suffering of its inhabitants, but the intangible ache of civilizations on the brink of oblivion. Immortality did not dull compassion. If anything, it sharpened it, for to endure the loss of worlds across millennia was to know grief in a way no mortal could comprehend. The first encounter with the insurgents was brief, yet fraught with tension. Figures emerged from the smoke, their armor crude but effective, marked with sigils that suggested allegiance to ancient, forgotten powers. Even from a distance, Valoris sensed the warp taint lingering around them, a subtle distortion that bent perception and morality alike. He raised his hand, signaling restraint. "We do not strike unless provoked," he commanded. "Observe, listen, and prepare. The battle is never won in haste, but in the mastery of perception and patience." Yet even as he spoke, doubts gnawed at him. Had centuries of leadership taught him wisdom, or merely delayed the reckoning that awaited every empire? Betrayal was a constant companion, lurking in the shadows of ambition and desire. He had seen worlds fall not to weapons, but to the quiet erosion of trust, the subtle poisoning of hearts and minds. Kael's voice brought him back from reflection. "Commander, a scout reports a hidden encampment. They move with unnatural coordination. This is no simple insurgency. There is strategy beyond mortal comprehension." Valoris's eyes narrowed. "Then we proceed with caution. Deploy reconnaissance, but keep our forces in reserve. Every choice we make now will echo for centuries. Do not underestimate the cunning born of desperation, or the cruelty that immortality can breed in those who seek it." The day waned, the sun a blood-red orb against the smoky horizon. Valoris surveyed the battlefield from the bridge, the fleet poised like silent watchers above a theatre of unfolding tragedy. He thought of centuries past, of battles fought in the name of loyalty, and of betrayals that had carved scars deeper than any blade. Even in triumph, there had always been loss, even in victory, sorrow. Yet the march continued. Caris awaited, not merely as a planet to be subdued, but as a crucible for testing the fragile bonds of loyalty and morality that held the galaxy together. Valoris, eternal yet burdened with the weight of human conscience, understood that the true battle was not with the insurgents, but with the tides of trust, fear, and ambition that swirled invisibly around him. The first step had been taken, and the echo of it resonated across the stars. The galaxy would watch, and the specters of past betrayals would whisper in the shadows, awaiting the moment when loyalty faltered, and the consequences of centuries would unfold in full. Valoris turned from the viewport, his expression calm yet unreadable. The council waited, the fleet waited, the galaxy waited, and in the quiet tension that preceded the storm, one immutable truth remained. Every empire falls, every hero is tested, and immortality is measured not in years, but in the weight of choices made and the betrayals endured. And so, the slow, inexorable march of the Legion of the Damned continued, each decision a thread woven into the tapestry of history, each moment pregnant with the possibility of salvation or ruin. The day stretched into a crimson twilight as the fleet loomed over Caris, silent and watchful, like a congregation of ghosts poised over a dying altar. Commander Zarek Valoris stood upon the observation deck, the weight of centuries pressing upon his shoulders, feeling the subtle tremors of doubt ripple through him. Even the immensity of the fleet, its gleaming hulls a testament to eons of engineering and conquest, could not shield him from the persistent whisper of uncertainty. Immortality was supposed to grant clarity, but it often brought only a heightened awareness of the fragility of all things. Beside him, Captain Lyra Kale moved with her usual quiet precision, yet her eyes betrayed unease. Commander, the insurgent leaders continue to send emissaries. They claim loyalty to no faction, only survival. Their rhetoric is persuasive and troubling. Valoris did not reply immediately. He traced a faint pattern among the scars of Caris, cities razed yet stubbornly resisting total annihilation. In the chaos of smoke and ash, he saw reflections of his own long existence. Victories hard won, allies lost, betrayals endured. "Kyle," he said at last, his voice low and measured. "Persuasion is a weapon as sharp as any blade. The question is whether it conceals a hand meant to strike us, or merely reveals the desperation of a species clinging to life." She nodded, but the hesitation lingered, subtle as the tremor in the void between stars. Loyalty, they both knew, could never be assumed, only tested. Even within the fleet, murmurs of unease had begun to spread. Centuries of obedience did not guarantee eternal faith. The past was littered with the corpses of trusted advisors who had succumbed to ambition or fear, and Valoris understood that history rarely forgave mistakes, even those made with the clearest intent. In the council chamber, officers gathered around the glowing holomap of Caris, shadows flickering across their faces in the dim light. Among them was Strategos Varek, whose keen mind had orchestrated campaigns across countless sectors, yet whose ambition now shone like a faint, hidden ember. "Commander," Varek began cautiously, "if the insurgency is indeed a product of desperation, we must consider negotiation. But if it is a deliberate challenge, our hesitation could invite ruin." Valoris met his gaze steadily. "And yet, Varek, action without comprehension is merely violence masquerading as strategy. We will not rush blindly into a trap, nor will we ignore the suffering of those who cling to life. Immortality grants us perspective, but it also demands responsibility. Consider this before offering counsel." A murmur rippled through the chamber, subtle but perceptible, a reminder that even the most disciplined minds were never free from doubt. The officers were shadows of past legions, veterans of centuries of warfare, and yet even they could not escape the uncertainty that now crept among the stars. Valoris sensed it, the imperceptible shift in loyalty, the flicker of ambition that could ignite into betrayal at the slightest provocation. Kyle approached the table, her presence a grounding force in the storm of unease. "Commander," she said softly, "I have prepared reconnaissance squads to engage the emissaries directly. They are trained to discern truth from deception, to measure intent with precision. If there is treachery, we will know before it strikes." Valoris inclined his head. "Good. But remember, Kyle, observation is only the first step. Interpretation carries the heaviest burden. A lie might be told with sincerity, and truth might conceal devastation. We cannot afford error. Not here, not now." The emissaries arrived under a veil of neutrality, their ships gliding silently through the ash-laden skies of Caris. They bore no banners, no insignia, only the faint glow of symbols lost to time, whose meaning had been swallowed by centuries of conflict. As they descended, Valoris felt the subtle pull of the warp, a distortion in the perception of reality that hinted at secrets hidden beneath layers of strategy and desperation. When the emissaries finally landed, Valoris and Kael received them personally. They were neither warriors nor diplomats in the conventional sense, but figures shaped by desperation and cunning. Their eyes held the weight of worlds lost, yet also a spark of defiance that hinted at latent ambition. Even as Valoris addressed them, he recognized the duality that defined every interaction in the galaxy: survival and deception, loyalty and treachery, hope and despair. "You seek aid," Valoris began, his tone calm, deliberate. "Yet I must know, do you ask from conviction, or is this a maneuver to test our resolve?" A figure stepped forward, its voice resonating with measured clarity. "Commander Valoris, we seek survival. Our allegiance is to no empire, no faction. We honor life where it endures, and resist annihilation where it threatens to extinguish hope. Judge us not by your suspicions, but by the truth we present before you." Valoris studied them in silence, weighing the statement against centuries of precedent, against memories of betrayals that had toppled entire sectors. The galaxy rarely yielded honesty. Most truths were weapons, and even sincerity could be layered with hidden agendas. "Very well," he said finally. "Your actions will speak, not words. We will observe, and if necessary, act." As the emissaries withdrew to establish their base, Valoris retreated to the observation deck, Kael at his side. The sky of Caris was a tapestry of smoke and ember, cities scarred but enduring, the scars of rebellion etched into the land itself. He reflected on the first stirrings of doubt that had arisen in his officers, the subtle questioning of authority that always accompanied the unknown. Even in the presence of immortality, even with centuries of experience, he could not escape the fragile nature of trust. Kael's voice broke the silence. "Commander, do you ever fear that your decisions may hasten the fall of what you protect?" Valoris did not answer immediately. He gazed at the horizon, where fires still burned and shadows lingered. "Fear is a companion to wisdom, Kael. To lead is to navigate uncertainty, to balance survival with morality, ambition with restraint. I have endured centuries of conflict, yet each choice remains a perilous step on a path whose end is never certain. If immortality grants insight, it also magnifies the weight of consequence." The night deepened, stars obscured by smoke and ash. The fleet hovered above Caris like silent sentinels, observers to a fragile and perilous truth. Empires were ephemeral, loyalty a fragile thread, and even the most immortal could be undone by subtle betrayal. Valoris understood this better than anyone, yet he also knew that the march must continue, for hesitation was a luxury the galaxy could not afford. As the first campfires of the insurgency flickered across the plains below, Valoris and Kael prepared for the trials to come. Battles would be fought, decisions weighed, and loyalties tested, not merely by the clash of steel and fire, but by the quiet, insidious erosion of trust. The true conflict was never purely external. It lay within the hearts of those who carried the burden of command and the fragile hope of survival. And so, the shadow of the first confrontation passed, leaving behind the lingering questions of loyalty, morality, and survival that would haunt Zarek Valoris and all who served under him. The march continued, slow and inexorable, guided by the faint light of hope and the persistent specter of betrayal. The ash-laden wind swept across the plains of Caris, carrying with it the acrid scent of scorched metal and dying civilizations. Commander Zarek Valoris stood at the forefront of the observation platform, his cloak catching the faint, fiery glow of the burning cities below. Even from this height, The devastation was immediate and intimate. Entire districts reduced to rubble, the skeletal remains of structures jutting into the smoke-choked skies. The scene was both a warning and a mirror, reflecting the fragility of empires, no matter how eternal their leaders. Beside him, Captain Lyra Kale remained silent, her eyes scanning the horizon, ever vigilant. She had grown accustomed to the weight of Valoris's immortality, the slow, unrelenting knowledge that time was no ally, that centuries of leadership were both a gift and a curse. Yet even she felt the tension that now gripped the fleet. Morale among the officers wavered like the flickering lights of distant cities, and whispers of dissent, subtle yet persistent, had begun to infiltrate the corridors of command. Valoris's gaze lingered on the smoke rising from the central city of Caris, where insurgents had established their stronghold. The fires burned bright, almost defiant, a testament to resilience that bordered on madness. Even in devastation, life sought to endure. "Kyle," he said finally, his voice a low rumble, "there is more here than mere rebellion. The insurgency is guided, disciplined. Someone, something, is shaping them. We must find the source, or risk being consumed by shadows we cannot perceive." Kyle nodded, but the unease lingered. Reconnaissance squads report structures and movements that defy conventional understanding. It is as though they anticipate our every action, yet leave no trace of their planning. Something ancient or forbidden may be guiding them. Valoris did not reply. He was thinking of betrayal, not the obvious treachery of enemies in the field, but the subtle, corrosive undermining of trust that often came from within. Centuries had taught him that those closest, the ones whose loyalty seemed unbreakable, could falter in a heartbeat, swayed by ambition, fear, or the quiet persuasion of power. Immortality, in its cruel irony, sharpened this awareness rather than dulling it. He had seen comrades turn against one another over trivial slights, entire legions crumble under the weight of whispered lies, and civilizations fall because the very stewards of their preservation succumbed to doubt. In the council chamber, Strategos Varek paced slowly before the hollow projections of the city. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, yet Valoris could sense the tension coiling within him like a serpent ready to strike. "Commander," Varek said finally, his voice steady but layered with implication, "we cannot ignore the possibility that the insurgents are but a symptom of larger fractures. Other sectors may rise in defiance or betray us at the first opportunity. To act hastily risks the collapse of far more than Caris." Valoris regarded him coolly. "And yet, inaction is no safeguard. History has proven that hesitation carries a heavier price than confrontation. We must act with precision and purpose, but with eyes wide open to the unseen." Kale stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on the edge of the projection table. "Commander, there are reports of insurgent leaders requesting dialogue. They speak of survival, but their rhetoric is calculated. Should we entertain negotiations or proceed with a display of force?" Valoris's gaze returned to the projections, noting the careful placement of encampments, the subtle patterns of troop movements. "We will meet them," he said at last, "but not as conquerors. We are here to observe, to measure intent, and to prepare for what must follow. Mercy and force are but tools, each dangerous if misapplied." A soft hum echoed through the chamber, the subtle vibration of the flagship's engines resonating through the floor. Outside, the fleet drifted like spectral watchers, their guns silent but ever ready. The sky above Caris was streaked with smoke and ember, casting long shadows over the scarred landscape. Even as Valoris spoke, he could feel the tension threading through the ranks. Doubt, fear, and the first whispers of distrust, subtle as the shifting of tectonic plates, yet capable of tearing the fleet apart if ignored. As the emissaries arrived once more, their ships gliding across the skies with an eerie grace, Valoris prepared for the delicate dance of diplomacy and vigilance. The figures who emerged bore no conventional insignia, only the faint traces of symbols older than memory, and their very presence seemed to warp the perception of those nearby. Immortality allowed Valoris to sense the hidden currents of influence, and he knew immediately that these were not mere mortals. Some force, ancient and cunning, guided their actions. The parley was tense. Words were measured, gestures precise. The insurgents spoke of survival, of resisting annihilation, and of living under the shadow of empires that had long forgotten the meaning of mercy. Valoris listened, his expression calm, yet within him churned the ever-present awareness that truth could conceal devastation, and that deception often wore the mask of sincerity. When the emissaries departed, Valoris returned to the observation deck. Kyle followed, her silence a reminder of the fragile trust that tethered them to each other. Below, the city burned, yet life persisted in hidden pockets, flickers of defiance that refused to bow. Valoris allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, thinking of the countless battles he had witnessed, the betrayals endured, the empires that had risen and crumbled before his eyes. Immortality was not a shield from grief. It magnified it, extending the memory of loss across the endless expanse of time. "Commander," Kyle said softly, breaking the silence, "do you ever regret the choices you have made? That perhaps in guiding the fates of so many, you have sown despair instead of order?" Valoris did not answer immediately. He gazed at the horizon, where smoke mingled with the twilight sky, and for a fleeting moment he allowed himself to feel the weight of centuries pressing upon his soul. "Regret," he said finally, "is a companion to wisdom. Every choice bears consequence, and every decision echoes across time. Immortality does not absolve us. It forces us to endure the consequences indefinitely. Yet inaction is no salvation. To hesitate is to invite ruin." Kyle nodded, understanding, though the uncertainty in her eyes remained. Even the strongest bonds could fray under the weight of doubt and despair. And Valoris, eternal yet ever human in his reflection, knew that the coming days would test loyalty, morality, and resolve in ways that would leave no soul untouched. The fires of Caris burned on, a reminder that survival demanded vigilance, that even in the heart of devastation, ambition and defiance could flourish. Valoris turned from the observation deck, his mind already calculating the next steps, weighing the hidden currents that would shape the future of the sector. The march continued, deliberate and inexorable, and in the quiet of the twilight, he understood a truth that no centuries could erase. Empires rise and fall, loyalty is fragile, and even the immortal are bound by the consequences of their choices. And so, the stage was set. The first true tests of loyalty, morality, and ambition were about to unfold, and the echoes of betrayal, subtle yet inevitable, would weave through the days to come. The galaxy waited, indifferent yet attentive, as the slow, relentless specter of history pressed onward. The first fires of dawn touched the ashen horizon of Caris, casting the wrecked cities and scarred plains in muted shades of red and gold. Commander Zarak Valoris watched from the observation deck of the Eternitas Ultima, the weight of centuries pressing on him with the same relentless force as the gravity of a collapsing star. The fleet hung in orbit like specters, silent witnesses to the suffering below, and yet no mere observation would suffice. Action was inevitable, but every choice bore consequences that stretched across decades, centuries, and the fragile continuity of loyalty. Captain Lyra Cale stood at his side, scanning the terrain with the precise attention of one who had learned to anticipate threats even before they materialized. "Commander," she said quietly, "the insurgents consolidate in the southern sectors. Their formations are precise, almost ritualistic. Intelligence suggests a hidden command nexus, but its location remains unknown. Reconnaissance has yielded only fragments." Valoris's gaze did not leave the horizon. "Fragments are sufficient to guide action, Cale, if interpreted correctly. Precision without understanding is a trap, and haste invites ruin. We must weigh every step, for the smallest miscalculation can ripple outward to catastrophic effect." Kyle hesitated, then nodded. The truth was unavoidable. Even centuries of experience could not eliminate doubt entirely. Immortality sharpened perception, yes, but it also magnified uncertainty. Each decision carried the double-edged weight of foresight and consequence. In silence, the two watched the fires burn, the smoke curling upward like the lingering spirits of lost civilizations, as if the planet itself whispered warnings of ambition, betrayal, and mortality. Within the council chamber, Strategos Varek presented his calculations with meticulous care, his gestures tracing patterns of troop movements and possible insurgent positions. "Commander," he said, "the insurgency has anticipated our advance in multiple sectors. Their resistance is not merely strategic, it is preordained, as if they have knowledge of our methods before we act. We face an enemy that operates not by chance, but by foresight." Valoris regarded him steadily. "Varek, foreknowledge does not equate to invincibility. They may predict patterns, but no one can predict resolve. We proceed with vigilance and restraint, observing before striking, yet ready to act when necessary. A measured approach preserves loyalty within our own ranks, which is always the more delicate battlefield." Even as he spoke, Valoris felt the subtle tremor of unrest threading through his officers. Loyalty, even among veterans forged in countless wars, was never guaranteed. Doubt whispered in quiet corners, and ambition, as it always did, lingered like a shadow waiting for an opening. Immortality had taught him this truth repeatedly. Betrayals are never always visible, and trust is a fragile commodity. Kyle's voice broke the tension. "Commander, the insurgents have extended an invitation for direct engagement. They claim it is to discuss terms, to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. We may find answers, or we may walk into a carefully laid trap." Valoris turned his gaze toward her, the light of the burning cities casting long shadows across his features. "Engagement is inevitable, Kyle. We will meet them, but not blindly. Trust must be earned through observation, and every gesture measured. The weight of centuries does not absolve us from error. It demands caution and clarity." As the emissaries' ships descended into the smoldering plains, Valoris prepared a contingent for deployment. Each unit was trained not only in combat, but in reconnaissance and subtle diplomacy. The galaxy, he knew, was rarely divided between friend and foe in clear terms. Loyalty and betrayal existed in gradients, and understanding the shades between was essential to survival. On the ground, the emissaries awaited, their forms partially concealed beneath flowing robes etched with sigils older than memory. Their eyes glimmered with intelligence and defiance, and even from a distance, Valoris perceived a faint warp distortion, a subtle indication of abilities beyond mortal comprehension. Immortality granted him perception of the unseen, and he knew instinctively that these figures were not merely rebels, but harbingers of a force capable of challenging centuries of imperial dominance. The meeting began with careful formality. Words were chosen, gestures precise. The insurgents spoke of survival, of resisting domination, of carving space for life amidst the ruins of empires. Their rhetoric, measured and persuasive, was layered with truths and half-truths, designed to test the patience, loyalty, and judgment of those who listened. Valoris listened silently, allowing the words to settle, feeling the gravity of each statement. The warp's subtle influence teased at perception, attempting to bend judgment, yet centuries of vigilance tempered his instincts. He recognized the truth within their pleas and the shadow of manipulation that accompanied it. To act hastily would be folly. To hesitate might invite catastrophe. Leadership demanded navigation of these delicate currents, and immortality offered both clarity and unbearable responsibility. Kyle, standing slightly behind, whispered, "Commander, can we trust them?" Valoris's eyes did not leave the emissaries. "Trust is earned, Kyle, not granted. Even centuries of experience cannot remove doubt entirely. We observe, we test, and we act only when consequences are fully comprehended. Every choice carries the weight of generations. Even inaction has a price." The day wore on, the sky streaked with smoke and ember, painting the scarred landscape in colors of both beauty and devastation. Fires burned, but life persisted in hidden enclaves, survivors refusing to yield entirely to annihilation. Valoris reflected on the paradox that defined his existence. Immortality provided perspective, yet it also magnified sorrow. He had witnessed countless worlds fall, legions betrayed, alliances crumble, and even victories were tinged with grief. Time was not a healer. It was an unflinching observer, recording every triumph and failure with impartial rigor. Finally, as the emissaries departed for their encampments, Valoris turned to Kale. "Prepare the fleet for potential escalation. We proceed with caution, but every contingency must be anticipated. The insurgency is more than rebellion. It is a test, not only of strategy, but of loyalty, morality, and the endurance of all who serve." Kyle inclined her head, understanding the unspoken weight of his words. Even as immortals, they were bound to the currents of consequence. Each decision, each engagement would echo across centuries, shaping the fate of Caris and the fragile trust within the fleet. As night fell over the scarred world, the fires glimmered like distant stars, fragile and defiant. Valoris gazed at them silently, the weight of centuries pressing upon him, knowing that the coming days would demand not only tactical brilliance, but the courage to navigate betrayal, ambition, and the quiet erosion of loyalty. Every step forward was fraught with peril, yet retreat was unthinkable. And so, the slow, inexorable march continued. The insurgency would challenge more than strategy. It would test the bonds of loyalty, the morality of decisions, and the endurance of immortals against forces that thrived on subtle manipulation and desperation. Zarek Valoris, eternal yet burdened with conscience, understood the truth. The galaxy waits for no one, and even the most careful march carries the weight of ruin and redemption alike. The night over Caris was heavy with smoke and whispers. Commander Zarek Valoris stood alone on the observation deck of the Eternatus Ultima, his silhouette framed against the dying embers of the planet below. The fires of insurgent resistance flickered like the heartbeat of a dying star, faint yet defiant, illuminating the ruins with fleeting light. Immortality granted him the perspective of centuries, Yet it did not dull the ache of witnessing life persist under suffering so relentless. Even the smallest acts of defiance carried the weight of tragedy. Captain Lyra Kale joined him silently, her presence steadying. Yet the tension in her posture mirrored the unease that gripped the fleet. "Commander," she said softly, "reconnaissance reports indicate unusual fortifications in the northern sector. They are not merely defensive. They are designed to mislead, to draw forces into traps. Whoever commands these insurgents is skilled, perhaps centuries old in knowledge, though mortal in form." Valoris did not immediately respond. The warp's subtle distortions rippled across his perception, teasing him with glimpses of hidden currents and unseen manipulations. Even immortals could be deceived, and centuries of experience had taught him that wisdom alone was insufficient to guarantee clarity. "Kyle," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate, "we must act as both observers and arbiters. Knowledge without discernment is a weapon against oneself. Every step we take must consider not only the insurgent's intent, but the hidden fractures within our own ranks." Kyle inclined her head. "There is unease among the officers. Strategos Varek has grown increasingly insistent on preemptive strikes. His calculations are sound, but his tone carries the subtle weight of ambition. He fears the insurgency may overreach, yet I sense something more, a desire to claim victory for himself, should it come to fruition." Valoris allowed a moment of silence to stretch between them, heavy with the ghosts of centuries past. Immortality was both a gift and a curse. He had seen allies become adversaries, comrades betray not for malice but for survival, and victories undone by the quiet erosion of trust. Even now, he could sense the tension threading through the fleet, subtle yet insistent, like a virus waiting for opportunity. Leadership demanded not only strategy, but an understanding of the fragile lattice work of loyalty upon which all empires depended. In the council chamber, officers argued quietly over the interpretation of the insurgents' movements. The hollow projections displayed formations, potential ambushes, and the faint glow of warp-tainted areas that resisted conventional scanning. Every analysis was laced with uncertainty, every suggestion shadowed by the possibility of betrayal. Valoris observed them without comment, knowing that silence often revealed more than speech. Even the most faithful officers were capable of decisions driven by ambition, fear, or fatigue. Varek approached, his expression calm, yet sharpened with intent. "Commander, the insurgency is consolidating rapidly. If we delay, we risk losing strategic advantage. I recommend a full deployment of ground forces, swift, decisive action to eliminate the threat before it metastasizes." Valoris regarded him steadily. "Varek, haste carries the weight of unforeseen consequences. Even victory can be hollow if achieved through miscalculation. We proceed with caution, observing and testing loyalty within our own ranks as much as the enemy's. Every decision must reflect both immediate necessity and the ripple of centuries yet to come." The tension between command and ambition was palpable. Varek's eyes flickered, subtle but unmistakable, as if he weighed the possibility of asserting control independently, using the conflict as leverage. Immortality had taught Valoris that such thoughts were inevitable among those with centuries of experience and pride. Trust was not given lightly, and even the most disciplined officers could falter in the presence of opportunity or fear. Kyle placed a hand on Valoris's shoulder. "Commander, the emissaries request a third audience. They speak of secret negotiations and offer intelligence that may reveal the insurgency's true command. It could be a trap, but it could also illuminate the path forward. Valoris's gaze swept over the fires of Caris, the scarred landscape reflecting the paradox of hope and despair. "Arrange the meeting," he said finally. "We go with eyes unclouded, weapons ready, and the understanding that even truth may be layered with deception. The galaxy rewards vigilance and punishes hubris. Immortality does not grant immunity to either." The emissaries arrived in the eerie light of the dying night, their ships moving with silent precision, their forms, shrouded in robes and symbols older than memory, carried the same subtle warp taint that had marked previous encounters. Valoris felt it as a distortion in perception, a ripple that challenged certainty, a whisper of danger that could mislead the unwary. He had learned to trust his instincts, honed over centuries of leadership, yet even they demanded testing against reality. The parley began under the watchful eyes of Valoris's contingent. Words were chosen with care, gestures deliberate, and even silence carried meaning. The insurgents spoke of survival, of resisting annihilation, and of hidden knowledge that lent their actions a subtle, almost uncanny precision. Valoris listened, weighing the balance of truth and deception, understanding that even a gesture of sincerity could conceal a plan to manipulate, mislead, or destroy. As the meeting concluded, Kyle whispered, "Commander, can we trust them?" Valoris's expression remained calm, yet his mind churned with calculation and caution. "Trust is never given freely, Kyle. It is measured, tested, and earned through observation and consequence. We act, but with awareness that even truth may bear danger. Immortality grants perception, but it magnifies responsibility. Every decision, every interaction carries the weight of centuries." The emissaries departed, leaving behind a quiet tension that lingered like smoke. Valoris remained on the observation deck, Kyle beside him, both contemplating the fragile lattice of trust, loyalty, and ambition that stretched across the fleet. The fires of Caris flickered below, defiant yet ephemeral, mirroring the persistent struggle of civilizations, empires, and the hearts of those who endured them. In the distance, the first signs of insurgent mobilization were evident. Forces moved with uncanny coordination, deploying into positions that hinted at knowledge beyond mortal comprehension. Valoris understood immediately. The trials ahead would test not merely strategy, but loyalty, morality, and the endurance of those who carried centuries on their shoulders. Betrayal, subtle yet inevitable, would thread its way through the coming days, challenging both the fleet and the immortals who led it. As the night deepened, Valoris reflected on the unyielding truth of his existence. Immortality was not a refuge from consequence. It was an unending witness to the rise and fall of empires, to the subtle corrosion of loyalty, and to the weight of decisions that would echo across millennia. The march of the Legion of the Damned continued, slow and inexorable, guided not only by strategy, but by the ever-present specter of moral and psychological trial. And so, the stage was set. Caris awaited its reckoning, and Zarak Valoris, eternal yet burdened by conscience, knew that the coming days would demand mastery, not merely of warfare, but of trust, deception, and the unflinching weight of centuries. The slow, deliberate march continued, carrying with it the intertwined destinies of the immortal and the mortal, the loyal and the ambitious, the living and the shadows that lingered between. The skies above Caris were alive with fire and smoke, the horizon jagged with the silhouettes of collapsing structures and smouldering ruins. Commander Zarak Valoris stood on the bridge of the Eternatus Ultima, the weight of centuries etched into the hard lines of his face. Immortality had granted him perspective, yes, but also the unrelenting awareness that time could erode not just flesh and stone, but trust itself. The insurgency was no longer a distant threat. Their forces moved with precise coordination, striking at supply lines, ambushing patrols, and spreading unease through the very ranks of the fleet. Captain Lyra Kale joined him at the viewport, her expression taut with both focus and concern. "Commander, they are executing maneuvers that suggest prior knowledge of our movements. Our reconnaissance indicates hidden warp signatures, subtle but pervasive. This is no ordinary insurgency. They fight not merely with weapons, but with perception, with deception." Valoris's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the report. Deception, yes, but perception can be manipulated, Kale. The true battlefield is not only in the physical realm, but in the hearts and minds of those who act. We will not be undone by mere cunning. Centuries of experience have taught that the subtlest betrayal is often the most dangerous. Kyle exhaled softly, though the tension did not leave her shoulders. "Even among our officers, Commander, there are fissures. Strategos Varek has suggested independent maneuvers, citing the urgency of decisive action. His loyalty is sound, yet ambition stirs beneath the surface. We cannot afford fractures while the insurgency tests every weakness." Valoris turned from the viewport to the council chamber, where the officers had gathered in anticipation of his command. The hollow projections of Caris flickered across the room, highlighting the insurgent positions, ambush routes, and areas of potential warp influence. Every detail was a thread in the tapestry of the coming battle, yet the faintest misinterpretation could unravel it entirely. "Officers," Valoris began, his voice calm but resonant. "The insurgency below is organized, intelligent, and guided by forces beyond our immediate perception. Their purpose is survival, yet their methods are deliberate, precise. Every action we take must reflect both strategy and the preservation of loyalty within our own ranks. We are not merely fighting an enemy. We are navigating the treacherous currents of trust, ambition, and morality." Varek stepped forward, his stance measured but insistent. "Commander, with all due respect, observation alone will not suffice. If we delay, they may consolidate power, and the warp influence will become entrenched. We risk losing control of the theater entirely. Immediate, decisive action is required." Valoris regarded him steadily, reading the tension that lay just beneath the surface. Varek's loyalty was long proven, yet centuries had honed ambition alongside skill. Even the most devoted could be swayed by fear or opportunity. "Varek, haste carries the weight of unforeseen consequence. Decisions made in urgency often bear ruin. We act, yes, but with precision, vigilance, and constant awareness of the fragile trust that binds us. Remember, betrayal is not always obvious, and loyalty is never guaranteed." The fleet stirred into silent readiness, a ghostly assembly of ships poised above the planet, engines humming with latent energy. Reconnaissance units moved toward key insurgent positions, their sensors probing the faint warp signatures, mapping the terrain, and recording the subtleties of movement. Even as they operated, Valoris could feel the tension in his officers, the quiet questioning of judgment, the subtle weighing of authority and ambition. On the surface, insurgent forces began their own maneuvers, striking at supply convoys and ambushing patrols with an efficiency that suggested long experience, yet also a calculated restraint. They avoided full confrontation, instead testing the fleet, probing for weaknesses, and observing the responses. Valoris understood immediately that this was not mere resistance. It was strategy, a deliberate challenge designed to reveal both strengths and flaws. Kyle's voice broke through the quiet hum of the bridge. "Commander, their forces are converging on the eastern supply route. It's a clear attempt to force our hand. If we respond too aggressively, they could trap us in a position of disadvantage." Valoris's gaze swept the map, calculating probabilities with centuries of honed instinct. "Then we act deliberately, deploy counter units to intercept, but do so in a manner that preserves options and tests loyalty within our own ranks. Every soldier, every officer, every decision is a measure not only of capability, but of moral and psychological endurance. This is a crucible in which the true nature of our command will be revealed." The first engagements began with a tension so palpable it seemed to thrum through the hull of the flagship. Explosions dotted the plains like violent stars, scattering insurgent units while exposing hidden warp distortions. The fleet coordinated with precision, yet even the most disciplined maneuver revealed subtle imperfections. A hesitation here, a misalignment there. Small fissures that whispered of human and immortal fallibility alike. Valoris remained a calm center in the storm, issuing orders with deliberate clarity. Do not be drawn into overextension. Observe and adapt, but maintain cohesion. Victory is measured not by destruction alone, but by preservation of life, of trust, and of the integrity of our command. Even the immortal must temper action with understanding. Cale's gaze met his, and in that instant he recognized the shared weight of centuries of command. Immortality did not insulate one from error. It amplified responsibility. Every maneuver, every deployment, every decision would ripple outward, influencing the fates of thousands, perhaps millions, and the moral burden of choice was inescapable. Hours passed in a tense cadence of observation and engagement. The insurgents tested every vulnerability, probing for cracks in strategy, loyalty, and morale. Even as the fleet adapted, Valoris sensed the subtle influence of ambition, doubt, and fear threading through his officers. A quiet specter more dangerous than any conventional weapon. As night fell, the smoke of battle mingled with the twilight sky, casting the scarred landscape in shades of red and gold. The insurgents withdrew strategically, leaving only a trace of disruption, yet revealing nothing of their deeper plans. Valoris understood that the true battle had not been fought with fire and steel alone, but in the minds and hearts of those who served under him. Loyalty had been tested, ambition revealed, and the fragile calculus of command stretched taut across the battlefield. Kyle stood beside him, her expression unreadable yet alert. "Commander, they are unlike any foe we have faced. Not merely in skill, but in intent. They shape events as much as respond to them." Valoris allowed himself a faint nod. "Yes, and we will continue to observe, to test, and to act with awareness. The true conflict is never merely external. It lies within. The endurance of trust, the navigation of ambition, and the preservation of conscience under the weight of centuries. The march continues, Cale, inexorable and deliberate, guided by vigilance and tempered by the shadow of inevitability. And so, the first true external confrontation concluded, not with annihilation, but with subtle revelation. The insurgency had proven itself a challenge, not merely of tactics, but of loyalty, morality, and perception. The slow, inexorable march of the Legion of the Damned continued, each decision a thread woven into the tapestry of history, each moment pregnant with the potential for salvation or ruin. The smoke over Caris hung like a shroud, a dim veil that turned the horizon into a tapestry of ash and fire. Commander Zarek Valoris stood at the edge of the observation deck, his cloak catching the faint, flickering glow of distant embers. The first wave of skirmishes had ended, yet the tension did not ease. Immortality gave him perspective, yes, but it also magnified every ripple of uncertainty. Every movement, every whisper, every decision weighed heavier, because he had seen the consequences of impatience, of miscalculation, countless times across centuries. Captain Lyra Kale joined him in silence. Her eyes were sharp, unyielding, yet shadows lingered beneath her gaze. "Commander," she said softly, "reconnaissance indicates that insurgent movements are now centralized. They are coordinating, not merely reacting. Someone or something is guiding them with purpose." Valoris did not reply immediately. His mind traced the threads of history, the echoes of betrayals and victories that had shaped not only the galaxy, but his own understanding of command and loyalty. "Purpose can conceal manipulation, Kyle," he said at last. "We must discern intent without falling prey to preconceptions. Observation is our greatest weapon, yet it demands patience." Kyle hesitated, then nodded. "And the officers, Commander, the fissures you foresaw, they are widening. Strategos Varek has grown insistent, urging direct action. His words are tempered by loyalty, yet the ambition beneath them is undeniable." Valoris's gaze swept across the fleet, hovering above Caris, ships poised like silent sentinels. Loyalty, he reflected, was a fragile structure, and ambition was the unseen force that often fractured it. Immortality did not grant immunity to these subtleties. It merely ensured one witnessed them repeatedly, acutely. Even the most disciplined officers could falter when shadows whispered promises of advantage or survival. In the council chamber, Varek presented his case with the precision of a master strategist. "Commander, the insurgency consolidates with alarming efficiency. Delay risks loss of initiative. Preemptive strikes, coordinated across multiple sectors, could destabilize them entirely before they entrench further." Valoris studied the officer's expression carefully, reading not just strategy, but the quiet undercurrent of ambition. "Varek," he said evenly, "decisions made in haste often bear unforeseen consequences. We act deliberately, balancing strategy with vigilance, always mindful of the trust that binds our own ranks. Even the immortal cannot escape the ripple of error." Kyle stepped forward, her voice measured but firm. "Commander, the insurgents have requested a fourth parley. They claim intelligence of the fleet's operations, but they offer negotiation rather than combat. It could be a trap or an opportunity to observe their intent more clearly." Valoris's eyes returned to the smoke-choked horizon of Caris, the ruined cities below, a reflection of impermanence, of survival under duress, and of ambition untempered by morality. "We will attend," he said finally, "but with caution. Every gesture, every word, every action is a measure of both truth and deception. Immortality grants perspective, but it magnifies the cost of misjudgment. Every choice carries weight, more than a century of consequence in the making." The emissaries arrived beneath the heavy twilight, their ships gliding silently across the burning plains. Their forms were obscured by flowing robes and markings of ancient design, their very presence warping perception, subtle yet undeniable. Valoris sensed the warp distortions as an undercurrent, guiding and shaping the insurgency with a precision that challenged comprehension. It was not merely strategy. It was manipulation, deliberate and careful. The meeting commenced in tense quiet. Words were exchanged, calculated and measured. The emissaries spoke of survival, of resisting annihilation, and of the fragile hope of life persisting amidst the ruins of empires. Their rhetoric was persuasive, yet layered with implication, leaving the immortals to read between the lines. Every gesture, every inflection was a test, and Valoris knew that comprehension of intent would determine not only tactical success, but the preservation of loyalty within his own ranks. Kyle watched intently, her gaze flicking between emissaries and officers, silently recording subtle cues, noting micro-expressions and assessing morale. Even centuries of discipline could not render human or immortal behavior entirely predictable, and the cracks of ambition, doubt, and fear threaded through every interaction. When the emissaries departed, Valoris turned to Kale. Prepare countermeasures for potential deception. Observation alone is insufficient. We must anticipate action, reaction, and betrayal alike. The insurgency tests more than strategy. It tests morality, trust, and endurance. The first external engagements resumed as the night deepened. Insurgent forces moved with uncanny coordination, striking at weak points while avoiding full confrontation. Even the smallest misstep could cascade into disaster. Yet the fleet's countermeasures were precise, calculated, and patient. Fire and explosion dotted the plains like violent stars, revealing both skill and restraint on both sides. Valoris reflected on the paradox that defined his existence. Immortality granted perception, but it also magnified responsibility. Every decision, every hesitation, every deployment was a thread woven into the tapestry of history. Even in victory, grief lingered. Even in observation, moral weight pressed upon the soul. Kale's voice broke the silence. Commander, the insurgency adapts faster than we anticipated. It is as if they anticipate our strategies, even our hesitations. Valoris's eyes did not leave the horizon. Adaptation is survival, Kyle. But foresight does not guarantee control. Every movement, every choice, every subtle calculation is a test, not only of their ability, but of our vigilance, our discernment, and our endurance under the weight of centuries. The march continues, inexorable and deliberate. The night settled over Caris, fires flickering in the ruins, insurgent positions consolidating yet retreating when confronted. A dance of survival and subtle manipulation. Valoris understood the truth of what had begun. The coming battles would test not merely tactical brilliance, but loyalty, ambition, and the endurance of those who bore centuries upon their shoulders. The galaxy waited, impartial yet observant, as the slow, deliberate march of the immortal pressed forward, measured against the impermanence of life, the fragility of trust, and the inevitability of consequence. The dawn over Caris brought no relief, only a pall of smoke and the muted glow of fires that refused to die. Commander Zarak Valoris stood at the observation deck of the Eternitas Ultima, staring at the scarred plains below. Each ruined city, each shattered district, was a testament to the fragility of empires and the enduring cruelty of time. Immortality allowed him perspective, yet even centuries of command could not soften the weight of witnessing destruction repeatedly, nor the awareness that the smallest misstep could unravel everything. Captain Lyra Kyle joined him, her armor dark and unmarked despite the chaos unfolding below. "Commander," she said quietly, "our reconnaissance units report insurgent forces in motion. They are converging with an efficiency that suggests deliberate orchestration. Their strikes are precise, designed to test not only our strategy, but our capacity for cohesion. Someone, or something, is guiding them with subtle intent." Valoris nodded slowly, the familiar tension settling across his shoulders. Subtle intent is often the most dangerous. The mind can be manipulated as easily as the body, Kale, and ambition is never absent from even the most loyal hearts. We must navigate this theatre with both foresight and restraint, observing not only the enemy, but the currents of loyalty and doubt within our own ranks. Kyle's eyes flickered to the council chamber, where officers whispered behind projected maps and hollow screens. Commander, the fissures are widening. Strategos Varek advocates for direct engagement, arguing that decisive strikes will stabilize the battlefield. Yet beneath his words lies ambition, subtle and insistent. Even among our immortals, such ambitions are never fully suppressed. Valoris's gaze returned to the horizon, where smoke and fire painted the ruins with ominous beauty. Ambition and loyalty exist in gradients, he said. Even centuries of service cannot eliminate the conflict within. Leadership requires perception, not only of strategy, but of the subtleties of desire, fear, and conscience. Every choice is measured not only in victory, but in trust, preserved or broken. Within the council chamber, officers debated strategies in hushed tones. The insurgents had demonstrated remarkable foresight, deploying forces that anticipated even routine countermeasures. Valoris observed them silently, reading not only tactics, but the undercurrents of doubt and ambition threading through each voice. The war was no longer purely external. It was a psychological crucible, testing discipline, morality, and loyalty. Varek stepped forward, his voice low but insistent. Commander, hesitation risks allowing the insurgency to consolidate beyond control. We must strike decisively, eliminating their command nodes before they can entrench further. Delay could invite catastrophe. Valoris considered him carefully, weighing the officer's skill against the subtle edge of ambition that always accompanied experience. Varek, history has taught that even the most precise strategy fails when executed without full comprehension. Every action must balance immediate necessity with long-term consequence, and every officer must understand that loyalty is as fragile as any formation. Even immortals bear responsibility for the unforeseen consequences of action or inaction. Kyle's voice broke the tension. Commander, the insurgents request an audience. They claim knowledge of our positions and intentions, offering terms that may avoid bloodshed. It is likely a test, yet also an opportunity to discern their intent more clearly. Valoris turned to her, the weight of centuries reflected in his eyes. Arrange the meeting. Approach it with vigilance. Every gesture, every word, every glance may carry intent, deception, or revelation. Immortality offers perception, yes, but it does not absolve error. Every interaction is a thread in the tapestry of consequence, stretching across decades and centuries. The emissaries arrived under the dim light of the dawn. Their ships descended silently, gliding across the smoke-choked plains with a grace that belied their menace. Figures emerged cloaked in flowing robes, etched with symbols of ancient design. Valoris perceived the subtle warped distortions that accompanied them, like currents bending perception and intent. This was no ordinary insurgency. Their guidance was deliberate, intricate, and suffused with intelligence beyond mortal comprehension. The parley began in tense quiet. Words were measured, gestures deliberate. The emissaries spoke of survival, of resisting domination, and of hidden knowledge that guided their movements with uncanny precision. Valoris listened carefully, interpreting not only the explicit content but the subtle undercurrents, aware that even sincerity could conceal manipulation. Every officer, every soldier, every immortal under his command would be measured by these interactions. their loyalty tested in ways that even Valoris could scarcely quantify. Cale's voice was low, steady, yet tense. "Commander, can we trust them?" Valoris's gaze did not waver from the emissaries, but his mind raced through centuries of experience. Trust is not granted. It is measured, tested, earned through observation and consequence. Even centuries of knowledge cannot eliminate doubt entirely. Every choice carries weight. Kyle and immortality magnifies that burden. Observation, discernment, and patience are our allies. Assumption and haste are our enemies. When the emissaries departed, the fleet resumed readiness. Subtle movements across the battlefield revealed that the insurgents were adapting, consolidating positions and probing weaknesses without committing fully. Valoris understood immediately. The true test had begun. The battles to come would challenge strategy, loyalty, morality, and the endurance of those who had witnessed centuries of conflict and lived. The fires of Caris burned across the scarred landscape, reflecting in Valoris's eyes as he contemplated the paradox of his existence. Immortality was both shield and torment. It granted insight, but it also amplified responsibility. Every decision, every hesitation, every tactical maneuver was imbued with the moral weight of consequences that would echo far beyond the battlefield. Cale's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "Commander, the insurgents are unlike any we have faced. Not merely in skill, but in intent. They shape events as much as respond to them." Valoris allowed a brief nod. "Yes, and we will continue to observe, to test, to act with awareness. The true conflict is never merely external. It lies within, the endurance of loyalty, the navigation of ambition, and the preservation of conscience under the weight of centuries. The march continues, inexorable and deliberate." Night fell, and Caris was cast into deep shadows, the fires flickering like ghosts of impermanence. The insurgents' movements became more subtle, their strikes more precise, and the warp-tainted undercurrents more insistent. The slow, deliberate march of the Legion of the Damned pressed onward, carrying with it the intertwined destinies of the immortal and mortal, the loyal and ambitious, and the living and the shadows between. In the quiet of the observation deck, Valoris understood a truth that centuries could never diminish. Even in victory, the weight of choice, trust, and consequence would endure, shaping the fates of all who bore witness and all who marched beside him in the relentless tide of history. The smoke of Caris hung heavy across the plains, a dense shroud that filtered the dying light of the sun into a muted glow. Commander Zarak Valoris stood alone on the observation deck of the Eternatus Ultima, gazing at the fractured landscape below. The first waves of engagement had left the terrain scarred, fires smouldering in the hollowed ruins of cities, and the faint glimmer of warp-tainted areas marking the subtle presence of insurgent manipulation. Immortality had granted him perspective, but it had also brought the knowledge that repeated exposure to devastation did not dull its emotional weight. Every ruin was a testament to impermanence, every ember a reminder that even the strongest empire could crumble. Captain Lyra Cale joined him quietly, her presence a stabilizing counterpoint to the growing unease within the fleet. "Commander," she said, her voice low yet sharp, "our recon reports indicate insurgent positions shifting with precision. They are not merely reacting, they are orchestrating. Their movements suggest knowledge of our strategies, even our hesitations." Valoris's eyes did not leave the horizon. "Perception can be both weapon and trap, Kyle. We must discern the truth from the illusion, the intent behind action. Even centuries of command cannot eliminate doubt entirely. The insurgency challenges not only our tactics, but the very foundations of trust and loyalty among those who serve. Kyle's gaze flicked toward the council chamber, where officers debated quietly, their voices filtered through the soft hum of hollow projections. Commander, the internal tension is growing. Strategos Varek continues to press for decisive action, arguing that hesitation will cede advantage. I sense ambition woven beneath his words, a subtle insistence on control should the opportunity arise. Valoris's expression remained calm, though the weight of centuries pressed upon him. Ambition and loyalty exist on a continuum, Kale. Immortality grants perspective, yet it magnifies responsibility. Even those sworn to duty may falter under pressure, and the consequences of error extend beyond the battlefield. Every decision must weigh strategy, morality, and the enduring threads of trust. The council chamber stirred as Varek presented his arguments. Commander, the insurgency consolidates rapidly. Delay risks loss of initiative and the entrenchment of warp influence. Swift, coordinated strikes could destabilize them entirely before they solidify positions. Valoris regarded him, reading the subtle cues of ambition threaded beneath the precision of his strategy. Varek, action without comprehension is perilous. Even centuries of experience cannot prevent error if the currents of loyalty and morale are ignored. Every officer must understand that their decisions carry consequences across both time and conscience. The battle is fought not only against the insurgency, but against the erosion of cohesion and trust within our own ranks. Kyle interjected with measured concern. Commander, the insurgents have requested a fifth parley. They claim intelligence regarding our positions and intentions, offering negotiation rather than direct conflict. It is likely a test, yet also an opportunity to discern intent more clearly. Valoris considered the offer, weighing perception against probability, insight against deception. Arrange the meeting, he said finally. We go with vigilance. Every gesture, every word, every pause may carry intent, manipulation, or revelation. Immortality grants perception, but it magnifies the cost of error. Every interaction is a thread in the web of consequence, stretching across decades and centuries alike. The emissaries arrived beneath the dim twilight, their ships gliding silently across the smoke-choked plains. Figures emerged from the vessels, cloaked in flowing robes etched with ancient symbols. Warp-tainted currents rippled subtly around them, bending perception and instilling an unspoken tension in those who observed. These were no ordinary rebels. Their guidance was deliberate, meticulous, and suffused with intelligence beyond conventional comprehension. The parley commenced with the careful precision of ritual. Words were chosen with deliberate ambiguity, gestures layered with subtle meaning, and silence wielded as effectively as speech. The insurgents spoke of survival, of resisting domination, and of secrets that had guided their movements with uncanny accuracy. Every statement, every expression, every calculated pause tested those who listened. Not only the fleet's immortals, but the fragile trust within the ranks. Kyle's gaze remained keen, scanning micro-expressions, noting deviations in tone and subtle cues that might betray hidden motives. Even centuries of discipline could not render behavior entirely predictable. Ambition, doubt, and fear threaded through each officer, and Valoris understood that the subtle currents of loyalty would determine the outcome as surely as firepower or strategy. When the emissaries departed, Valoris turned to Kale. Prepare contingency plans for potential deception. Observation alone is insufficient. We must anticipate both action and reaction, loyalty and betrayal. The insurgency tests more than strategy. It tests morality, endurance, and discernment. The first true escalation of battle resumed under the muted light of the burning sun. Insurgent forces moved with uncanny precision, striking weak points, probing defenses, and retreating before full engagement could be forced. Every maneuver was calculated, every engagement a subtle assessment of reaction, morale, and perception. Even the fleet's disciplined countermeasures revealed minor imperfections, faint glimpses of human or immortal fallibility that could be exploited. Valoris reflected on the paradox of his existence. Immortality granted insight, yet it magnified responsibility. Every decision carried moral weight as well as tactical consequence, and the echoes of even minor errors would reverberate across generations. Victory, he understood, was never complete. It was a temporary reprieve in a universe defined by impermanence and the relentless march of consequence. Cale's voice broke the tension. "Commander, the insurgency adapts faster than anticipated. It is as though they anticipate our strategies, even our hesitations." Valoris's gaze swept over the smouldering plains, the scarred ruins reflecting both resilience and fragility. Adaptation is survival, Kyle, but foresight does not guarantee control. Every movement, every choice, every calculation tests our endurance, our discernment, and our loyalty. The march continues, inexorable and deliberate, guided by vigilance, tempered by conscience, and shadowed by inevitability. Night fell over Caris, fires flickering in the ruins like defiant stars. The insurgents consolidated yet remained elusive, their movements precise and deliberate. The slow, deliberate march of the Legion of the Damned pressed onward, carrying with it the intertwined destinies of the immortal and mortal, the loyal and ambitious, and the living and the shadows that lingered between. Valoris understood, as always, that the coming days would demand mastery not merely of warfare, but of trust, deception, and the unflinching weight of centuries. Even in victory, the cost of choice and the echoes of consequence were inescapable, shaping the fates of those who bore witness and those who marched beside him in the relentless tide of history. The night over Caris had grown colder, the acrid smoke from countless fires mingling with the chill of approaching warp storms. Commander Zarak Valoris moved through the corridors of the Eternitas Ultima, the steady hum of the vessel beneath his feet echoing faintly against the armored walls. Every step was measured, deliberate, as though centuries of experience had embedded caution into his very gait. The fleet above the planet awaited orders, yet beneath the surface of precision and loyalty, subtle fractures festered. Immortality granted insight, yes, but it also magnified the weight of suspicion and the inevitability of betrayal. Captain Lyra Cale fell into step beside him. Her expression, usually unreadable, bore the tension of unspoken concerns. "Commander," she said quietly, "Varek's actions have grown more insistent. He is advocating for unilateral engagement, bypassing the full council's deliberation. His loyalty remains, yet ambition threads beneath his words, and I fear he may act independently if given opportunity." Valoris did not reply immediately. He had witnessed countless officers, mortal and immortal alike, falter under the pressures of command, ambition, and fear. Centuries had taught him that loyalty was rarely absolute, that even the strongest bonds could be tested by circumstance or desire. Ambition is neither inherently malicious nor inherently virtuous, he said finally. It is a measure of desire tempered or corrupted by morality and circumstance. Varek's actions must be observed with care, Kael, for the greatest threat often comes from within as much as from without. They entered the council chamber, where the officers' faces were etched with tension. Hollow projections displayed the latest insurgent movements, units shifting with uncanny precision, warp-tainted regions pulsing faintly in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. Valoris studied them in silence, reading both the tactical data and the subtle cues in the officers' expressions, the brief flicker of doubt in one, the suppressed impatience in another, the near imperceptible calculation behind Varek's poised stance. "Commander," Varek began, his voice calm but insistent, "our reconnaissance confirms that the insurgents are adapting faster than anticipated. Delay is increasingly costly. A decisive strike at the eastern flank, coordinated with orbital interdiction, could destabilize their operations entirely. Time is against us." Valoris regarded him with measured scrutiny. Time is an illusion to the immortal, yet a burden to those who must act within it. Every strike carries consequences beyond immediate success. Morale, cohesion, and the fragile lattice of loyalty are at risk. Varek, do you understand that even the most precise maneuver can unravel if the human or immortal element falters? Varek's gaze remained steady, but Valoris detected the tension in the tightness of his jaw. Even centuries of service could not fully mask the subtle hunger of ambition, the desire to leave a mark upon history, to shape outcomes independently. "I understand, Commander," Varek said, "but hesitation is risk. Indecision carries cost as surely as action." Kyle's voice cut in, calm but edged with caution. "Commander, the insurgents have requested another parley. They claim knowledge of our positions and intentions, offering terms that may allow observation without engagement. It could be a trap, yet also an opportunity to test loyalty and discern intent." Valoris allowed a brief pause, the weight of the decision settling over him like the lingering smoke of the fires below. "Arrange the meeting," he said at last. "Every gesture, every word, every silence must be interpreted with vigilance. Immortality grants perspective, but it also magnifies the consequences of error. Observation is as much a weapon as any cannon, yet it demands patience and discernment." The emissaries arrived under the dim glow of warp-tainted night. Their ships glided silently across the burning plains, figures emerging from flowing robes etched with symbols of ancient power. Valoris felt the subtle distortions of the warp as a presence around them, a reminder that perception itself could be weaponized. These insurgents were no ordinary foes. Their guidance was deliberate, their intent inscrutable, their actions measured and meticulous. The parley commenced with careful formality. Words were chosen with precision, gestures deliberate, and silence wielded as effectively as speech. The insurgents spoke of survival, resistance, and hidden knowledge, guiding their movements. Every statement was layered, testing both the fleet's resolve and the officers' integrity. Valoris watched, not merely interpreting the content, but the unspoken undercurrents of fear, ambition, and loyalty threading through the room. Kyle leaned close, her whisper a steady reminder. "Commander, the subtle tests of loyalty. They are growing." Varek's posture, his insistence. It is more than strategy. There is a shadow of something else, something unspoken. Valoris nodded imperceptibly. "Indeed, even immortals are not immune to desire or doubt. Observation and patience are our shields. The fleet's cohesion, the loyalty of officers, the morality of decisions, all are threads woven into the tapestry of consequence. One misstep, and the entire structure may unravel." When the emissaries departed, the fleet resumed readiness. Subtle movements revealed that insurgent forces were adapting, probing, and testing the limits of the fleet's cohesion. Even minor hesitations could cascade into disaster. Even the smallest lapse in trust could compromise strategy. Valoris understood immediately. The next phase of battle would challenge not only tactics, but loyalty, ambition, and moral endurance. As the night deepened, the fires of Caris flickered across the scarred landscape. Insurgent forces consolidated, yet remained elusive, their movements deliberate and precise. The slow, inexorable march of the Legion of the Damned pressed onward, carrying with it the intertwined destinies of the immortal and the mortal, the loyal and the ambitious, and the living and the shadows that lingered between. Valoris reflected quietly, aware that even in anticipated victory, the cost of choice was inexorable. Immortality amplified responsibility, forcing him to consider not only immediate consequences, but the echoes of centuries. Every decision, every hesitation, every command was a thread in a tapestry that would extend far beyond the battlefield, shaping fates, trust, and history itself. In the silence of the observation deck, Kale spoke softly. "Commander, betrayal is inevitable, is it not? Even among the most faithful, ambition lurks." Valoris's eyes swept over the darkened plains, lit faintly by smouldering fires. "Yes, Kale, and it is the recognition of that inevitability that defines leadership. Even in the immortal, even in the fleet, even in victory, the weight of choice, trust, and consequence endures. The march continues, inexorable and deliberate, tempered by conscience and vigilance, and shadowed by the certainty that loyalty, like empires, is fragile. The fires of Caris burned into the twilight, the ruins casting long, jagged shadows across the scarred plains. Commander Zarek Valoris walked the observation deck of the Eternitas Ultima, the hum of the vessel beneath his boots a steady, distant heartbeat. Immortality had taught him patience, endurance, and the inevitability of consequence. Yet centuries had not dulled the sting of witnessing ambition, corrupt loyalty, or the subtle erosion of trust among those closest to him. Tonight, he felt it more acutely than ever. Captain Lyra Kale joined him in silence. Her eyes, usually calm, were sharp and restless. "Commander," she began quietly, "Varek has taken unilateral action. Reports indicate that strike units have engaged insurgent forces without awaiting council approval. Their casualties are minimal, but the maneuver was unauthorized. His rationale, the insurgency's consolidation, cannot be delayed." Yet beneath his words lies ambition, not merely strategy. Valoris's expression remained calm, though tension threaded through his chest. "Ambition," he said slowly, "is the shadow of desire cast upon action. Even immortals are not immune, Kyle. Loyalty is tested not in calm, but in pressure. Varek's initiative may succeed tactically, yet every decision made independently fractures cohesion. Trust is not merely given. It is measured, observed, and earned, or broken." Kyle's gaze swept over the battlefield holograms projected in the chamber. Insurgent positions shifted subtly, warp-tainted distortions flickering like hidden currents beneath the surface. "Commander, their responses are unnervingly precise. It is as if they anticipated Varek's strike, yet their casualties remain low. Someone is guiding them, someone who understands our command structure intimately." Valoris's eyes narrowed. "Precisely. The insurgency tests more than strategy. It probes loyalty, perception, and the ability to endure moral ambiguity. Every officer, every unit, every soldier is being measured. Varek's ambition, has exposed fissures not only in the fleet's cohesion, but in our capacity to discern deception from circumstance. The council chamber erupted in low, tense murmurs as Varric entered, his posture unshaken, eyes bright with controlled intensity. "Commander, the operation was necessary. Delay would have allowed the insurgents to consolidate fully. Our strike was decisive, minimal in cost, and maximized in impact." Valoris studied him, reading both precision and underlying tension. "Varric, your decision carries consequences beyond immediate success. Trust has been tested, cohesion strained. Even victory can fracture the moral lattice of command if ambition supersedes deliberation. Every choice echoes beyond the battlefield, across time and conscience alike." Varric's jaw tightened, but his gaze did not falter. "I am aware, Commander. The fleet endures, our position is strengthened, and the insurgency has been tested, yet hesitation costs more than action." Kyle stepped forward, voice steady yet urgent. "Commander, their emissaries have returned. They speak of alliances, of betrayals within our own ranks, and hint at knowledge of Varric's independent actions. They imply that loyalty is a fragile construct, and that ambition may shift the tide of war more than strategy itself." Valoris's gaze swept the holograms of the battlefield, noting subtle distortions where warp energy threaded through insurgent movements. He had anticipated this moment. The insurgency would manipulate perception as much as action, exploiting ambition, doubt, and the slow erosion of trust. "Prepare contingency plans," he said finally, his voice calm but resonant. "Observation alone is insufficient. We must anticipate both the external assault and the fractures within. Loyalty, perception, and the endurance of conscience are as much a battlefield as the plains of Caris." The emissaries' ships descended silently, figures emerging cloaked in robes that shimmered faintly with warp currents. Every step they took, every subtle gesture, radiated intention, manipulation, and subtle threat. Valoris felt the currents of perception bending around them, as if reality itself were a weapon in their hands. The insurgency was no ordinary rebellion. It was an intelligence, a force that manipulated the battlefield not merely with weapons, but with insight, subtlety, and precise timing. The meeting commenced, words measured, gestures deliberate, and silence wielded with careful precision. The emissaries spoke of alliances and betrayals, of the shifting sands of loyalty and the price of ambition. Each statement was layered, each pause deliberate. Officers and immortals alike were tested, not merely in strategy, but in perception and moral judgment. Even centuries of discipline could not eliminate doubt, nor fully predict the reactions of those whose ambition remained hidden beneath the surface. Kyle leaned close to Valoris, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Commander, Varric's ambition is now a weapon they wield against us. They know of his independent strike, and they imply that loyalty may falter elsewhere. The entire fleet's cohesion is at risk, not from the insurgents' fire, but from the fractures they have sown." Valoris allowed a brief nod, the weight of centuries pressing upon him. Yes, every decision now carries the weight of consequence. Every hesitation or action, a measure of trust, ambition, and endurance. Even immortality does not shield us from the corrosion of doubt or the subtle power of deception. The march continues, inexorable and deliberate, yet it is shadowed by the knowledge that even victory may be hollow if the bonds that hold us together break. The emissaries departed as silently as they had arrived, leaving a fleet tense with anticipation and uncertainty. Insurgent forces adapted in response to Varric's unilateral strike, consolidating positions while probing defenses, subtle yet relentless. Every maneuver was measured, every engagement a test of perception and endurance. Valoris knew the coming days would require not only strategy, but mastery of loyalty, ambition, and the moral resilience of those who served. Night fell, and Caris was bathed in dim twilight, fires flickering like ghosts of impermanence across the ruined plains. The insurgents remained elusive, their movements deliberate, yet the fractures within the fleet had been exposed. The slow, deliberate march of the Legion of the Damned pressed onward, carrying with it the intertwined destinies of the immortal and the mortal, the loyal and the ambitious, and the shadowed currents of perception that determined the true course of history. Valoris stood in silence, contemplating the fragile lattice of trust, the inevitability of ambition, and the enduring cost of choice. Even in victory, he knew that the weight of responsibility endured, shaping destinies and testing the limits of conscience. In the darkness, the Legion continued its march, guided by vigilance, tempered by insight, and shadowed by the inevitability that loyalty, like empires, was never absolute. The sky above Caris burned crimson, warped light twisting through the thinning clouds, as if the planet itself bled under the weight of conflict. Commander Zarak Valoris stood at the forefront of the fleet's command bridge, the hum of the Eternatus Ultima beneath his feet, resonating like the heartbeat of a living warship. Immortality had granted him centuries to witness the rise and fall of empires, yet nothing had prepared him for the precision with which ambition and deception now intersected. Every decision, every hesitation, and every command was poised on the razor's edge between triumph and catastrophe. Captain Lyra Kale joined him, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of distant conflagrations. "Commander," she said quietly, "our reconnaissance reports that insurgent forces are executing simultaneous strikes across multiple sectors. They anticipate our movements with unnerving precision. It is no longer a battle of strength. It is a battle of perception, of foresight, of moral endurance." Valoris's gaze swept the fractured horizon, where fires and warp distortions danced across ruined cities. "Yes, Kale, the insurgency has transcended conventional strategy. They manipulate not only the battlefield, but the intentions and loyalties of those who command it. Even immortality does not grant immunity to their subtle influence. Every officer, every soldier, every immortal is tested, not by fire alone, but by the shadows of ambition and doubt." Varek entered the command chamber, his expression calm, yet taut, with barely concealed insistence. "Commander, we have gathered that the insurgents plan a decisive strike tonight. If we do not act immediately, we risk encirclement and significant losses. My plan is to preemptively engage their eastern flank while maintaining orbital interdiction." Valoris's eyes fixed on him, reading both determination and the undercurrent of ambition that had grown through the previous days. "Varek, every move carries consequence, and every choice now resonates beyond the immediate battlefield. Your initiative has already tested trust and loyalty. Preemptive strikes without counsel may succeed tactically, yet they risk fracturing cohesion irreparably. Even victory can become hollow if the moral lattice is broken." Kyle stepped forward, her voice steady but tense. "Commander, the insurgents have dispatched envoys directly to our frontline units. They offer terms that promise temporary reprieve, but every indication suggests subterfuge. They seek to manipulate our perception and test our internal cohesion. This is no longer merely a strategic battlefield. It is a crucible of morality, loyalty, and foresight. Valoris allowed a moment of silence, the weight of centuries pressing down like the cold, unyielding metal beneath their feet. "Prepare for engagement," he said finally, but with vigilance, discernment, and the awareness that even our own can falter. Observation alone is insufficient. We must anticipate deception, ambition, and the fragile endurance of conscience. The insurgency measures not only strength, but subtlety, and our greatest challenge is not their firepower, but the resilience of our own morality and cohesion. The emissaries' ships descended across the scarred plains, shadows against the crimson light of the dying sun. Figures emerged, cloaked in robes inscribed with patterns that shimmered faintly with warp currents. Every movement, every gesture radiated intent, manipulation, and subtle threat. The insurgency's brilliance was not merely tactical. It was psychological, weaving perception and ambition into the very fabric of the battlefield. The parley commenced with deliberate precision. Words were carefully chosen, gestures layered with meaning, and silence wielded as a weapon. The insurgents spoke of survival, hidden alliances, and betrayals, testing both the fleet's resolve and the officers' moral endurance. Every statement carried weight beyond the literal, every pause a challenge to perception. Even centuries of experience could not predict the subtle influence their presence exerted. Kyle leaned close, whispering with quiet urgency, "Commander, Varek's ambition is now a fulcrum. The insurgents know of his unilateral actions. They imply that loyalty is fragile, that even the immortal may falter. The fleet's cohesion is at risk, not from their fire, but from the fractures they've sown internally." Valoris's gaze hardened. Yes, the true battle is never merely external. Every choice, every hesitation, every moral compromise carries consequence. Even immortality magnifies responsibility. Observation, foresight, and the endurance of conscience are as critical as any strike. The march continues, inexorable, yet shadowed by the awareness that trust is a fragile construct. As the emissaries departed, the insurgent forces began their assault. Simultaneous strikes erupted across multiple sectors, fires igniting in precise patterns, warp-tainted distortions pulsing beneath the surface. Every maneuver revealed mastery not only of warfare, but of perception and subtlety. Even minor hesitations could cascade into disaster. Even fleeting doubts within the fleet could shift the balance. Valoris directed the fleet with measured precision, each command a blend of strategy and moral awareness. Coordinate defenses with orbital interdiction, protect the flanks, observe the reactions of officers, both loyal and ambitious. Every engagement is a test, and every outcome a measure of both skill and integrity. The battle raged, a symphony of fire and shadow, ambition and loyalty intertwined in ways that defied simple comprehension. Varek executed maneuvers with precision, yet his independent actions created subtle strains across the fleet. Kyle observed closely, recording every micro-expression, every flicker of hesitation or doubt. Even centuries of training could not render human or immortal behavior entirely predictable. Valoris felt the weight of centuries in every choice, every command, every subtle observation. Immortality was not an escape from consequence. It was the magnification of responsibility. Every victory carried moral cost. Every tactical success bore the imprint of ambition and doubt. As the crimson night deepened, the slow, inexorable march of the Legion of the Damned pressed onward, their actions defined by both firepower and conscience, strategy and foresight. The battlefield was no longer merely terrain. It was a crucible, testing loyalty, ambition, and the endurance of morality itself. Even in the midst of victory, Valoris understood that the cost of choice would echo across centuries, shaping destinies, fracturing trust, and determining the ultimate fate of the empire he had sworn to protect. In the quiet moments between assaults, he reflected upon the paradox of leadership, that even the immortal must navigate ambition, deception, and the fragile lattice of trust, that every engagement was a measure of perception as much as skill, and that the march, relentless, deliberate, and shadowed, would continue, guided by vigilance, conscience, and the awareness that the bonds holding an empire together were as fragile as the ruins smouldering beneath the crimson sky. The skies over Caris bled fire and ash, the horizon fractured into jagged shadows by the dying light of distant suns. Commander Zarak Valoris stood at the observation deck of the Eternatus Ultima, the warship trembling beneath the impact of insurgent artillery and the subtle distortions of warp currents. Immortality had offered him centuries of perspective, yet in this moment he felt the piercing edge of responsibility more acutely than ever. Every decision, every hesitation, every command bore the weight of lives, loyalty, and consequence. Captain Lyra Kyle joined him, her armor streaked with soot and faint blood from minor skirmishes along the orbital defenses. "Commander," she said softly, her voice tight with urgency, "the insurgents are executing a coordinated strike against the core sectors. Their timing is impeccable, almost prescient. This is more than strategy. They are manipulating perception, exploiting fractures in loyalty and ambition alike. The fleet teeters on the edge of both physical and moral collapse." Valoris nodded slowly, eyes scanning the flames that danced across the ruined plains. "Yes, Kale. The true battle is never merely external. Every strike, every maneuver, every command tests the endurance of loyalty, morality, and conscience. Even centuries of service do not shield one from the subtle erosion of trust, or from the corrosive power of ambition in those closest to us." Varek appeared at the command console, his face pale, hands steady, despite the chaos unfolding around them. "Commander, we can intercept their central strike with concentrated firepower. A decisive engagement could fracture their forces entirely. Yet, there are whispers among the officers. Some question the morality of preemptive strikes, and loyalty is fraying." Valoris's gaze held Varek, seeing the tension threading through his resolve. Ambition can guide or destroy. Even in triumph, it leaves cracks in the lattice of trust. Preemptive action may succeed tactically, yet morally it is a crucible. Every choice carries consequences beyond the immediate. Loyalty, perception, and conscience are as vital as strategy. Kale's voice was low, urgent. "Commander, the insurgents have infiltrated communications and whispered rumors of betrayal among our immortals. Their aim is subtle, not annihilation, but the erosion of cohesion. Varek's unilateral actions are now a fulcrum upon which these fractures pivot." Valoris turned, the weight of centuries pressing into his shoulders. "Prepare the fleet," he said, voice calm but resonant. "Every officer must be observed, every unit coordinated, every contingency prepared. We fight on two fronts, against insurgent fire and against the corrosion of trust. Observation, foresight, and moral endurance are as crucial as cannons and ordnance. The march continues, inexorable, yet shadowed by ambition, doubt, and consequence." The insurgent emissaries arrived under the twilight, their robes shimmering with warp-touched patterns that seemed to pulse with intention. Each step radiated awareness and manipulation, subtle cues that tested both perception and resolve. Valoris felt the warp currents twisting around them, bending not only sight but intuition. probing the moral and emotional fortitude of all who observed. The parley began with deliberate precision. Words were measured, gestures layered with subtle meaning, and silence wielded as weapon. They spoke of survival, alliances, and betrayals, revealing knowledge of internal fractures and ambition. Every statement challenged perception, tested loyalty, and questioned morality. Even centuries of experience could not fully reveal the insurgents' intent. Kyle leaned close, voice taut with urgency. "Commander, they exploit Varek's ambition. Loyalty is strained across the fleet. Even the immortal cannot withstand the subtle erosion of trust without vigilance. Every decision now carries extraordinary weight, and every command is a moral as well as tactical measure." Valoris's gaze hardened, eyes sweeping the flames below. Yes, even immortality does not shield one from consequence. Every choice echoes across time. Every hesitation or act of initiative shapes loyalty, morale, and the future. Observation, foresight, and moral judgment are our weapons as much as plasma and ordnance. The march is relentless, yet every step is shadowed by fragility. As night fell fully upon Caris, the insurgent strike commenced. Simultaneous assaults erupted across multiple sectors, fires igniting in deliberate patterns, warp distortions pulsing beneath the surface. Every maneuver demonstrated mastery not only of combat, but of perception and subtle influence. Even minor hesitation could cascade into disaster. Every doubt, every flicker of mistrust could shift the balance irreversibly. Valoris coordinated defenses with unwavering precision, balancing firepower and moral vigilance. Protect the flanks. Observe officer reactions. Every engagement tests loyalty as much as strength. Anticipate deception, ambition, and wavering morality. The battle is as much within the hearts of our own as it is upon the plains below. Varek executed maneuvers with technical brilliance, yet Valoris noted the subtle strain and cohesion his independent actions had caused. Officers and immortals alike were divided by ambition, doubt, and moral unease. Even centuries of discipline could not eliminate vulnerability to these currents. Kael's hand rested lightly on Valoris's shoulder. "Commander, the insurgents push beyond strategy. They force choices, test endurance, and exploit fractures. The fleet's unity is hanging by the thinnest thread. The outcome depends not only on tactics, but on the moral courage to act despite doubt and ambition." Valoris allowed a moment of silence, observing the crimson-tinged battlefield. "Yes, Kyle, the true test of command is not merely the destruction of the enemy, but the preservation of trust, loyalty, and moral integrity. Even victory bears cost, and every decision now will echo for centuries. The march continues, inexorable, deliberate, and shadowed by consequence. The insurgent forces faltered, yet only briefly. Warp currents pulsed more intensely, bending perception and reality, testing every officer and immortal to their limits. The slow, deliberate march of the Legion of the Damned pressed onward, guided by vigilance, conscience, and the unyielding weight of responsibility. Every action was both test and consequence. Every command, a measure of strategy and morality. As the crimson night deepened, Valoris knew the coming moments would define not only the battle, but the enduring legacy of the fleet, the empire, and those who bore the burden of immortality. Even as fire and shadow raged below, he understood that the cost of choice, trust, and conscience would shape history, fracture alliances, and determine the ultimate fate of all who marched beside him into the relentless tide of war. The remnants of Caris lay in smouldering silence, a shattered testament to fire, ambition, and the passage of centuries. Commander Zarak Valoris stood atop the observation deck of the Eternatus Ultima, staring at the scarred plains below. The empire he had fought to protect, the fleet he had guided through centuries of war, now bore the scars of both conflict and betrayal. Immortality had granted him perspective, yet it had also made the weight of consequence unbearable. Every choice, every hesitation, every act of ambition had left indelible marks upon the galaxy and upon those who endured to witness it. Captain Lyra Kyle approached quietly, her armor tarnished and scorched, the faint bloodstains of battle still visible. "Commander," she said softly, "the insurgents are retreating. Their forces shattered, yet the fleet bears wounds deeper than the surface. Loyalty has fractured, ambition has left scars, and trust is eroded in ways fire cannot repair." Valoris's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the last of the insurgent vessels disappeared into the warp haze. "Yes, Kyle, victory has been claimed, yet the cost is eternal. Even immortality does not absolve responsibility. Every command, every preemptive strike, every test of loyalty has shaped the present, and the echoes will reverberate across centuries." Varek appeared at the chamber, his face pale, eyes flickering with the weight of choice and the consequences of ambition. "Commander, the central strike succeeded. Casualties were minimal, yet the fractures you predicted have deepened. Officers question the morality of our actions. Some have even suggested that your guidance, though unwavering, has been manipulated by ambition within the ranks." Valoris turned to him, his expression a mixture of gravitas and quiet sorrow. "Varek, ambition is neither holy virtue nor vice. It is a measure of desire, tempered or corrupted by morality and circumstance. Your actions shaped the battle, yet they also tested loyalty and conscience. The consequences of your initiative are woven into the lattice of history, and even triumph bears the weight of moral reckoning." Kale's voice broke the silence, urgent yet subdued. "Commander, there is more. The insurgents' warp manipulations have left lingering distortions, units that survived the engagement report's subtle psychological effects, visions of betrayal, and doubts seeded within their perception. Even now, centuries of discipline may not undo the erosion of certainty." Valoris's eyes narrowed, sensing the subtle truth in her words. Immortality had taught him patience, endurance, and foresight. Yet the psychological toll of this battle transcended any measure of experience. Every act of war, every maneuver, and every strategic choice carried not only tactical, but moral weight. Even in victory, the scars left by ambition, deception, and the subtle corrosion of trust would endure. The fleet gathered on the observation deck, officers and immortals alike, standing in quiet reflection. The battlefield below was silent now, save for the faint flicker of dying fires. Yet every individual bore the imprint of recent trials, ambition tested, loyalty strained, and conscience weighed against necessity. Valoris moved among them, a silent witness to the moral and emotional toll of centuries of command. Kyle stepped beside him, eyes scanning the assembled officers. "Commander, what now? The insurgency is broken, yet the fractures you warned of have become reality. Trust is fragile, and even immortality cannot repair it fully. The cost of choice has been paid, but the echoes will endure." Valoris sighed, the weight of eternity pressing into his chest. "The march continues, Kyle, yet it is forever changed. Even victory carries consequence. Loyalty, ambition, and conscience have been tested, and the results are irreversible. Immortality grants perspective, but it magnifies the responsibility and the burden of every choice. The fleet endures, yet the fabric of trust is forever altered. Varric stepped forward, humility threading his posture despite the brilliance of his tactical execution. Commander, I understand now. Even when action succeeds, the moral lattice may fracture. The consequences are not measured merely in victory or loss, but in the enduring integrity of those who serve and the perception of those who survive. Valoris's eyes softened slightly, a rare moment of human, if immortal, emotion. Yes, the cost of command is eternal. Every decision shapes history, loyalty, and perception alike. Even when the enemy falls, the shadows of ambition and the erosion of trust persist. The march of the Legion of the Damned is relentless, yet it carries not only strategy, but conscience, morality, and the weight of centuries. Kyle's gaze lingered on the horizon, the faint flicker of warp-tainted distortions still pulsing across the scarred plains. Commander, will these echoes ever end? Will the scars of choice, ambition, and betrayal ever heal? Valoris turned to her, eyes reflecting both sorrow and resolute clarity. No, Kale. They endure, as does every consequence of action. Immortality does not erase the past, it magnifies it. Every victory, every decision, every fracture leaves an indelible mark. Yet from this endurance, wisdom is gleaned, vigilance maintained, and the march continues. The universe is eternal, and we, though immortal, are its servants and witnesses. The fleet remained in quiet reflection as the last fires of Caris faded beneath the cold light of distant stars. The insurgents were gone, their threat diminished, yet the lessons of this battle would linger far longer than the flames. The subtle erosion of trust, the fragility of loyalty, and the burden of ambition would shape the course of the fleet, the empire, and the immortal commanders who bore witness to its cost. Valoris stood alone for a moment, the silence of eternity pressing in. He contemplated the paradox of immortality, the power to endure centuries, yet the inescapable weight of every choice, every betrayal, and every moral compromise. Even in victory, the cost was unending, and the march continued, inexorable, deliberate, and shadowed by consequence. Finally he spoke, his voice steady, resonant with centuries of experience. Let this victory be remembered not merely for its triumph, but for its cost. The empire endures, yet every soul within it carries the weight of choice. Ambition, loyalty, and conscience are eternal companions, and even immortality does not absolve responsibility. We march onward, tempered by the echoes of history, the shadow of consequence, and the knowledge that even the strongest bonds may fracture under pressure. The age has ended, yet the legacy continues. The march of the Legion of the Damned will endure, inexorable, deliberate, and vigilant, until the stars themselves fade. The fires of Caris dimmed, the scarred plains quiet, and the fleet gathered in solemn reflection. The insurgents had fallen, but the empire had paid in trust, morality, and the subtle fractures of ambition. Even immortality could not erase the echoes of choice. The march would continue, relentless, carrying with it the weight of history, consequence, and conscience. And so the era ended, not with triumphant celebration, but with reflection, vigilance, and the acknowledgement that even in victory, the cost of choice is eternal. The Legion of the Damned would march onward, shadows among the stars, bound to duty, conscience, and the unyielding tide of consequence.